Hey, it's your teacher, Mr. J Johnson, and I'm back. And today we're going to be talking about equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are just one fraction that's the same as another fraction in value, which is just basically saying that the pieces got split up a little differently, but the actual value is the same. I'll give you great examples in just a minute. But first, joke of the day. So, what goes ha 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 plop? Ha 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 plop. Someone laughing their head off, right? They say ha ha ha, boom, their head falls down. So it's a bad corny joke. We're gonna get started, okay? Let's take a look. Okay, don't mind my messy desk. Equivalent fractions. There are a few different ways to find equivalent fractions. I'll try to go through them pretty quickly. So the first one is just multiplying or dividing. Now, this is not something I did a lot of in class because a lot of you are learning, but you're pretty good at multiplication, division now, pretty much experts at it, so we can do this. So let's say we're gonna find an equivalent fraction for, and we'll do 4/8, okay? If I did that, I could come right over here. Let's just do multiplying first. I'll take 4/8, and then what I'll do is I'll actually multiply that by 2 seconds. Now, what I did was I just picked a number. I picked 2 seconds, but I could have picked 3/3, 5/5, 7/7, right? It didn't matter as long as whatever's the numerator is in the denominator. And then when I'm multiplying fractions, you just multiply straight across. So I would have 4 times 2. That's going to be 8. Now, this is exactly how you do multiplication of fractions, okay? So this is a 5th grade skill. 8 times 2 is going to give me 16. It's going to look just like that. When we do the division in a minute, it's a little different, but for this, it's just like that. Boom, multiply straight across. 8/16. Now, is 8/16 and 4/8 equivalent fractions? Yes, these are equivalent fractions here. Now, let me go ahead and show you this if I break it down. So imagine I had a cake, it looks just like so. And I divided the cake 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 into 8 pieces. I shaded 4 of them in. That last piece is not as pretty as it should be, but whatever. So I have 8 pieces there. Now, these pieces right here, if I wanted to show what happens when I change it to 8/16, I really am just putting a line through it like so. And now, instead of this being 4/8, I split the whole thing into more pieces, to smaller pieces. But I still have the same shaded amount. You see, the shaded amount does not change. The reason why it works like this is because of something called the let's see if I spell it right, multiplicative property of 1. Now, you know about this property already, okay? The multiplicative property of 1 just says that anytime, sorry, I got my finger in the camera a little bit. Anytime I multiply something by the number 1, it becomes the same number. For example, 4 times 1, that's going to give me 4. If I do 379 times 1, it's going to give me 379. Anytime I multiply something by 1, it stays the same number. Wow, check this out. 2 seconds is actually the same thing as 1. Anytime we have a fraction with the numerator and the denominator that match, they equal 1. So what I'm doing is I'm multiplying 4/8 times 1, not because I actually want to change the value of 4/8, but because I want to change how many pieces the whole was split into, okay? My denominator. So that is what happens here. If I was to take this same thing, 4/8, and I was to divide it by 2 seconds, a similar thing would happen because this is still the value of 1. And if I was to take 4 and divide it by 1, it would still give me 4. So if I do this, I'm going to actually divide the top. Now, this is where it's a little different. So in division of fractions, you actually are going to flip and then multiply when you're doing the actual 5th grade standard of dividing. But in this case, we're actually just going to divide the numerator and divide the denominator. So we have 4 divided by 2. That's going to give us 2. 8 divided by 2, that will give us 4. So I'll end up with 2/4. I can use my model right here just to show you that the same thing will happen. 2, 3. I have 1 2/4 shaded. Check this out. I come along, I split it like this, and it becomes 4/8. So that shows me that these two are actually of the same value, okay? Let's move on to our second strategy. So multiplying and dividing was the first one. Our second strategy for doing this is actually going to be just with fraction bars. Now, I don't always recommend this. This is really just something to do if you struggle with some of the other ways to do it, just because it doesn't work with numbers exactly, and it actually works with your ability to draw things well. So you have to have good spatial awareness to be able to do this. But spatial awareness is a form of intelligence, and some people are really gifted at it, so I like to show it, okay? So let's say we're going to still use 4/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That one's a little too big, but whatever. I got 4/8. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, this is why this matters so much. If you draw it too wrong, it's going to give you a big problem. Now, if I wanted to actually split this and find an equivalent fraction, I could find an equivalent fraction by doing a couple of things. First thing I could do is I could just split this in half. So, you know what? This is so bad. I'm going to get rid of it. We'll start over. Sorry, just fast forward through that part. I guess you already saw it, so how could you fast forward through it? Okay, let's do it like this. We'll represent it like this. We have 4/8 here, and we'll put a different equivalent fraction here. So I need to divide it correctly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, that's much better. So in this case, I have 4/8. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I wanted to show another fraction as equivalent, watch this. Boom, that's halves. Half is actually an equivalent fraction. So there's 1 right there. If I wanted to split it into fourths, check me out. Oh, that's fourths. So actually, 2/4 would be also another equivalent fraction. So that's a way for me to find. I just found 2 different equivalent fractions for 4/8 in just a few seconds after I draw a picture. So that's my second strategy, is using fraction bars. Let's go to the third strategy. It looks like we're going to have to get a new sheet. Whoop. This is strategy number 3. It's actually what's called a fraction train. Now, I definitely advocate for fraction trains because they're a great way to find equivalent fractions, and it'd be really helpful to understand fraction trains when you go into the 5th grade, okay? So in fraction train, all I do is I skip count across the top and skip count across the bottom to find equivalent fractions. So I have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Okay, so I just skip counted here. Let's skip count on the bottom. I have 8, 16, 24, 32, 40. So what I just did right now was I just found several equivalent fractions in a very short amount of time. All I do is skip count with this number, skip count with this number, and I essentially do this. Now, what I always advise people to do is after you do this, you go and put these numbers on top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then go back again and put the same number underneath those numbers. Why am I doing this? Because I'm actually showing you what numbers are being multiplied to find these answers. What do you mean by that, Mr. Johnson? Remember our multiplication strategy we did before? What would have happened if I would have did 4/8 and multiplied it times 3/3 instead of 2 seconds? I would have did this. 4 times 3, I would have got 12. 8 times 3, I would have got 24. It's the same thing as this right here, but some of the questions will ask you what did you have to multiply your number by to find your equivalent fraction. So this is a really important thing to do on top to make sure you know what to do. Okay, we'll go to the next one here. The last strategy is not something that you can do all the time for equivalent fractions. It works great for comparing fractions, but it doesn't always work for equivalent fractions unless you have a multiple choice question. So if we had to find an equivalent fraction for 4/8, and they had multiple choice questions here, like so, what you would have to do is you have to say, okay, well, that's 2/3. Let's say, well, this one's 3/5. We'll say this one's 1/2, and we'll say this one's 3/4, right? You could actually then take this number and repeatedly plug it in next to the other numbers, and then just use the regular butterfly method that a lot of students are really good at. So 8 times 2 is 16 over here. 3 times 4 is going to give me 12 over here. This number does not match that number, so this answer could not be correct. So I'll just do that again. 8 times 3 is 24. 5 times 2, that's going to give me 20. These numbers do not match. Answer's not correct. This time I got 2 and 4. That's going to give me 8. 8 and 1 is also going to give me 8. These numbers do match. It's probably the right answer, but we always check them all. So I have 3 and 8 and 3 is 24 here. 4 and 4 is 16. They don't match. The answer is C. So this is a great way for students that actually struggle with some of the math for these multiple choice questions to be able to answer that. So that, in a nutshell, is equivalent fractions. I'll be making another video in just a minute about comparing fractions. If you have any questions, of course, you can check the questions link below. And yeah, happy math for today. Have a good week. Bye.